Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Woke Mental Wellness podcast relaunch. I'm Cassie Walker, and today we are going to be talking about Black queer spirituality and religion. This is a topic that I definitely think we need to tackle as we continue on this focus of getting to know ourselves and being able to relate to our histories and our stories as individuals and people. When it comes to spirituality, there is an overwhelming consensus that spirituality in one form or another is innate in Black people. Whether you're atheist or orthodox doesn't particularly matter. What matters is the connection and the divinity that flows through our blood. And by that, we're not necessarily talking about religion. In this instance, what I'm talking about when I say spirituality is the idea that there's more than just ourselves, that we as people are connected in many ways, including some ways that science might not yet have full answers for. That's gonna change person to person, but I am a believer that we do have some shared connection with each other. Spirituality can be religion, it can be prayer, but spirituality, in my definition, also includes art. It includes dancing and writing, drumming, guitaring, whatever you want to say. Those are expressions of spirit, heart, energy. That, to me, those things are spiritual. And so as we continue with this conversation today, I want you to keep those definitions in mind, because I absolutely acknowledge that there's a lot of religious and spiritual trauma that happens in the Black community. Trust me, we are going to get there. But for right now, I want to go into history a little bit. Our history, because right now we're still very much in a space of the dominance of Abrahamic religions. That means Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the various sects that lie within each of those massive umbrellas. By and large, the use of particularly Christianity in an American context, the use of Christianity was used to oppress the spirit and identity of people and to try and make enslaved peoples more compliant by framing that slavery in the context of the Bible, and that being enslaved was a Black person's place. That use of religion, that use of organized religion, still weaves its fingers into our society today. Whether it's you walk into a church and you see white Jesus was not white. Or whether that is you used to go to church, but ever since you came out as gay or as bi or as trans or even as ace, that suddenly your faith community keeps you at arm's length or outright denies you. These are holdovers from colonial religion. Let's talk about that. If that comes predominantly from the forced import of colonialism, what was there before? How did we work? And we can really easily now, it wasn't easy in the past, but now we have so many African traditional religions that are gaining prominence, and you can now find books about them and podcasts where you can see that Our African indigenous religions, many of them, Hulu, Ifa, have in them explicitly queer gods, queer spirits, divine powers that do not ascribe to gender binaries or heterosexual reinforcement of narrow definitions of love. When you start to do this work and you start to look at where we as a people come from, we start to realize that there's not as much queer phobia in pre-colonial Africa as we've been led to believe, and as there is homophobia and queerphobia in the African continent and diaspora now. So once again, we find ourselves the unfortunate recipient of unwanted bigotry that has now stuck with us through generations. That makes us deny ourselves. And that once again brings us back to trauma, intergenerational developmental traumas. You might be able to tell that this is probably going to be our theme for this season. I'm going to call it a season because we can't talk about healing without coming to find who we are. I know this is part of my journey. I will fully admit I am fairly critical of Christian churches because that is where I grew up and that is where I really solidified a deep hatred of myself in a lot of ways. But Christianity doesn't have to be that. No religion has to be that. These are, once again, systems and institutions. If they're systems and institutions, it means that there's something that we can change if we desire to. What they do, on the other hand, is that creates a distance from our own self, our own sense of spirit, our own sense of higher purpose, being, desire, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to be terribly nitpicky here with language, because at the end of the day, what really matters is that we are able to connect to ourselves in a way that allows us to heal. So we have a bit of history with the way that colonialism radically shifted acceptance and conceptualization of sexuality and gender. You'll notice when you study several African languages, you'll start to notice that there aren't really many gendered pronouns. Those come from English and French and colonial languages. That is really telling. The way we use language can say a lot about ourselves. If in the language it was not seen as important to heavily gender people, of course there wouldn't be words for it. The same way as if anyone's ever taken linguistics, you'll talk about cultures that only count to a certain number because there was no need to count higher than that or what have you, because it wasn't important and language is supposed to be. It's supposed to be functional. So where you be communicates the same thing and you can understand me. The reason I go into this little linguistic tangent is because this is something that we can also use when we talk about the transference of spirituality into religions, specifically organized religions. So when I'm talking about religion versus spirituality here, spirituality is going to be on that more individual noticing your connection to the world, the universe, the ancestors, the earth, kind of a thing. Religion, I'm going to be talking about systems and institutions of belief that are supposed to serve to form or frame spirituality. Just so that we're all on the same page about what I'm talking about here. So then we start talking about religion, and we take this connection and we try and fuse it down into books, Bibles, Torahs, what have you, to be followed. The problem, I don't even know that it's a problem, but what happens in trying to codify is that there's something there, someone with power who has an agenda. At the end of the day, no matter what God you believe in, holy books were written by people. That's why there are so many different versions of the Bible. Some with Lilith, some without, some with more chapters and some with less, depending on what those authors wanted. If there's anything that history has taught us, it is that history is written by the survivors. History tends to end up being written by the people in power, and they are unlikely to show themselves in a negative light. And so then, through this, people hope to see, typically, themselves in their divine entities. Which is what brings me to white Jesus. We have something here that is an anomaly. Now, there have been movements in Black Christian churches to bring Jesus back to his roots too, because if anyone has read the Bible here, we know that it took place in the Middle East. It took place in Northeast Africa. It is incredibly unlikely that Jesus was a blue-eyed, pale white man. This flies in the face of literally everything we know. Even archaeological and anthropological renderings in modern history have shown that Jesus is much, much more likely to have been a dark brown to black man with curly hair and a more flattened nose. He is much more likely to look more like an African man. So why is white Jesus so pervasive? This comes back to that colonialism I was talking about. You can't tell people that they are lesser, that they are supposed to be enslaved, that their God-given purpose on this earth is to toil for the more deserving races, and then show them a picture of a savior that looks like them. That would be bad for business. And so part of disconnecting us from ourselves is not only obscuring the fact that indigenous African spirits and gods were not monolithically straight, cis, hetero entities, that they were diverse and beautifully queer. But also, you've got to replace that with something. You've got to say, no. See, this is how you get saved. This is who saves you. That savior looks like us. This is why you should bow to us. I am a firm believer that white Jesus is a tool of oppression. I don't see any other way around it. I don't see how you can take a man who, in the Bible itself, saved a gay couple by saving one of the members from death, knowing that they were in love, and say, no, this man hates queers. How you can take someone who, in the stories, flipped over tables and said things along the lines of, the road for a rich man to heaven is thinner than the head of a needle, and say that that entity, that man, that savior wants you to be wealthy and wants you to give them money so that they can be wealthy and get a third jet. That doesn't even sync up with these stories. And when we start to notice these disconnections, that can start to bring us back into connection with our own spirituality so that we can journey in whatever religion or without organized religion, if we so choose. There's a lot of people who now acknowledge that their religion isn't in a church. It's not in an organization that hides the horrific actions of priests molesting children. Because once again, those are systems that have shown that they cannot be trusted, and systems that we can, if we choose, rebuild to work for us. We can read these books, if we want to stay in them, and say, I don't think that this anti-capitalist, anti-fascist Jesus would be in favor of slavery and unfettered greed. It's amazing what we do to historical and religious figures throughout time and the way that they morph and change, even despite these texts still keeping these aspects of these stories. The queer phobia in religion is not congruent to the majority of religious teachings. And I know some people are going to really disagree. If you're still here at this point, thank you. If you're not, well, you're not here. Let's now move out of Christianity, because there's a lot more to the world than Christianity. There was a study that actually said that Muslim people at this point in time are overwhelmingly becoming supportive and affirming of their queer brothers and sisters and sibs. There's large movements in all of these Abrahamic religions, and Judaism and Islam, in addition to Christianity, to get back to a spiritually in line place with our world and the diversity in it. And then we have other belief systems, Hinduism, Buddhism, Ifa, Hoodoo, Voodoo, that are the places that things started for a lot of people. There's a lot of Black folks who have turned to Buddhism and the ideas in Buddhism about life and suffering in order to make sense of experience. And at the end of the day, that's why a lot of us turn to religion, even after being hurt and harmed by churches and organized religion and the use of religion and spirituality by our loved ones and caregivers and community members to turn us away. When we talk about those kinds of uses of spirituality and religion, the disconnections of them, that's spiritual trauma. There's spiritual bypass that happens there. When I talk about spiritual bypass, that is what happens when spirituality or religiosity are used in order to disconnect or circumvent needing to connect with something hurtful or harmful, a trauma. When in religious circles, people say immediately, oh, you have to forgive them. That's the godly thing to do. That's a spiritual bypass. That's harmful. Forgiveness isn't supposed to be rote and immediate. Forgiveness has to be something that is felt and come upon in time. And in trying to speed that along and say, okay, are we done with this yet? That is bypassing all of the processes that we need to heal. And this is something that's really common, especially when we talk about queer people in religion and the ways that we get treated in religious organizations, the way that we get pushed to the side, our concerns about that person being queerphobic. Oh, well, they're a good person. They come to church. You should just forgive them. I think that misses the point. I think that breeds more hurt. And hurt people hurt people, healed people heal people. And what we're trying to figure out is how to cross those lines and help heal people, because we're all still a little hurt in our own ways. And especially if we've been through the massive rejection that can happen when you leave a church, when you call out wrongdoing, when you come out as yourself and start to connect to yourself, and then you have this wound of losing your community, is so profoundly sad and hurtful that that's going to take time. And I want to make it clear that anyone that's been through things like, yeah, forgiveness is great and beautiful and also unnecessary to heal. It may come, and that's great. And also the forgiveness that matters the most is the forgiving of yourself, because when we are wounded in these ways, trauma disconnects us from ourselves, because we will try to continue to protect that relationship, that attachment. Will then question our trustworthiness, our views of things. And if the community that we're in is also in this hurt, then it's completely possible that they will side with that instinct to protect the community that ends up harming us. So no, you don't have to forgive right away. There's a distinct difference between coming to terms with the things you've been through, regaining trust and forgiving yourself, forgiving those that have harmed you, and harboring hate. Those are distinct and different things. Just because you have not forgiven someone doesn't mean you harbor hate. And those are distinctions that are really important when we're talking about spirituality and religion and Black queerness. Because in all actuality, like this therapy stuff, this mental health stuff is like new for us, and it's been used to harm us a lot. And still is in some ways. If you get a bad therapist, like that's a lot. That'll turn you off of it for a long time, potentially. And so our healing has come a lot from our spirituality and from religions. Drumming and singing, being in community and connection with people is so important to healing. And so when the places that we are told are the most friendly for us to get that, where we're supposed to be able to get that healing from people that do look like us, when those are cut off, that is a massive loss. There's going to be a lot of grief, and we either act in and degrade ourselves and blame ourselves, or we act out. As we've already discussed, I have long had problems with the church, and I used to be all on the fuck Christianity train. I've healed and I'm not as far on it. Now, there are definitely, if we look at something like Westboro Baptist, like, yeah, no, fuck those guys. Like, they're making a choice there. But coming back, being able to have that, this is something that helps some people. How can we make this better? How can we get back to the love that is supposed to be at the center of books like the Bible? Is important. Having those outlets are healing for people, and our people need healing. What I've really enjoyed and what started to change my mind from the very militant, there's nothing good that can come out of this mode after I finally got fed up with the church, was when I came to Chicago and there were so many like queer churches and knowledgeable scholars. The Harvard Divinity School for the last 4 years has had Black spirituality and religion conferences. I know at least the third and the fourth from the last 2 years are on YouTube, and I've been watching them and seeing Black theologians, Christian and non-Christian, come together and talk about the need for Black communities to get back into acceptance and affirmation with queer folks, to stop this nonsense, and acknowledging the fact that this is the taint of colonialism by and large, carried over through generations of trauma and hurt and attempts to get closer to the charmed circle that we talked about in the first episode for this season. So there's a lot there. We've talked a bit about histories, spirituality versus religion, spiritual bypass and trauma. And so at this point, what do we do? Well, the first thing is, I say affirm. Your experiences are valid. You don't have to go back to any religion that hurt you, that harmed you. And then from there, deciding what is your connection to the greater world, to the greater universe. Whether that is through science and trying to figure out how all of this is connected and find those answers, whether that is through neo-paganism or an African traditional religion or a combination of things that just feel right for you, whether that is through art, music, acting, dancing, writing, film, whatever it is that allows you to express your spirit, your passions, the things that get your heart thumping, that make you flutter and think, I like being here. This is exciting to me. I love this. Whatever lights up the world for you, because the world is dark enough as it is. Those things that touch you, that touch your spirit, find those and allow yourself to explore anything and everything that just start with sparks in interest. It doesn't have to be profound. I know I'm waxing poetic here and it sounds just possibly a little absurd, but at the end of the day, start with just things that are like, that's pretty, that's interesting. You know what? I like the sound of that. And then see what happens when you engage. Whether it's ritual, whether it's a band, whether it's an open mic night. Granted, those are online now, but like, be careful going to in-person open mic nights right now. But I fully believe that finding the things that spark your passion is sparking spirit. And that part of our journey as Black queer people to heal is being able to reconnect with our spirit, being able to reconnect with the fact that the world may be hard and gross sometimes, a lot of times, but that there's something that binds us together that acknowledges and loves our differences, and that if we come together with that and acknowledge that we need each other and can love each other, we can do anything. And we can fix this broken down ass world that we have. So that's my message for today, is find your spirit, whatever you define that to be, and allow it to help you heal. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the best on your healing journey. This has been Woke Mental Wellness, a Black queer mental health podcast for Black queer people by Black queer people.